Hello, fellow readers, and welcome back to the Fireside Lit Book Club, a quiet, candlelit corner of the internet where we read slowly, think deeply, and speak authentically about our experiences. I'm Lindsay, and I invite you to join me by the fire as we explore the soul of a book, the beauty it reveals, the questions it asks, and the ways it helps us understand life, identity, and meaning just a little more clearly. Today's episode is going to be all about cultivating a reading practice and what that really looks like when it comes to reading intentionally, carving out time to read, picking up books that are worthwhile. We're going to be discussing all of that. And this is a topic that's obviously near and dear to my heart because I have been engaged in some form of a reading practice regularly since, I guess really since high school, but back then I didn't think about it as much. I was just reading, picking up books for fun. And then college was when I sort of became very much intentional about the material I was reading. I was reading to expand my horizons. And then, obviously post-college, I wanted to keep that up. And then also as an author, just stay abreast of the contemporary work being published in the literary world. That was important to me as well. So I read for like a whole plethora of reasons now. It's not just, to expand my horizons intellectually, although that's a really important goal of mine in reading. But it's also to just, stay up to date with the book world and expose myself to a little bit of everything, especially the more popular or critically acclaimed books. I want to be in the know when it comes to those. Even genres, that I don't typically read, I like to be surprised. So let's just dive right in. For those of you who like the idea of reading and know you're really capable of getting invested in a book, but are hoping to become more of a regular reader who really interacts with the books you're reading, this episode is for you. And we're going to be talking about creating a rhythm, a relationship, and a space in your life where words can change you. So first things first, when it comes to all of this, how do you select the right books to read? And obviously there's no one right answer to this. The answer really boils down to a couple of different things because, let's face it, there are a lot of books out there. And the way I think about it is if you are choosing to read one, you're choosing to neglect all the others. So my philosophy is make it good. Determine which books are worthwhile for you and pass up the others, or put them down if they're not your cup of tea. I know some people feel really guilty about this. And to be honest, I don't love the way it feels either, but I've become much more resigned to doing this if, in particular, I'm reading maybe a book that doesn't have quite as much of a reputation yet. It's not in the canon. It's not a classic. I really like to hold myself to the standard of finishing when I embark on those types of books. But if I pick up, maybe a contemporary novel or like a memoir or a science book, and I'm just kind of like, I don't really know how much I'm getting out of this, I will typically retire it after about a third of the way through. That is my kind of metric for, am I enjoying this book? Am I getting anything out of it? No, I'll put it down at that point. So one way to select your books, and I've been doing this for a long time, or a version of this, I should say. But I think it's a really fun little ritual at the beginning of each calendar year to put together a to-be read list, or a TBR, for that specific year. I am pretty active on Goodreads. I have hundreds of books to choose from, but at the beginning of every year, I compile a list that makes sense for the kind of mood I'm in at the beginning of that year. It includes some of the books I've been meaning to get around to, maybe the books that feel especially relevant for that time in my life. And sometimes what I'll do as the year goes on is just adjust it based on burgeoning interests to account for that. I also like to structure my list in a way that makes sense with the change of seasons, because that can be really fun. So for instance, I'm recording this episode in early September. The books that are remaining on my list for the rest of the year, and this is not comprehensive, I'm just going off the top of my head, I am planning to read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in October, because that's from my understanding, it's more of like a spooky, eerie type of novel, along the lines of Frankenstein, which I really loved and wish I could read for the first time again. I highly recommend that one. I also have The Turn of the Screw by Henry James on my list for October. Really excited about that one as well. If memory serves, I think it'll actually be my first Henry James, which is pretty cool. And then I have another book. It's a contemporary novel, and it's kind of like Halloween themed fun on my list for like very end of October, early November. It's called The Sentence. Don't ask who the author is. I couldn't tell you, but I heard about it, I believe on Goodreads, and I was like, ooh, this one looks like a fun little like festive read. So I added that. So yeah, I mean, my reading lists in general, if you just scroll through my Goodreads account, they're a pretty good mix of classic literature, contemporary fiction, occasionally philosophy, psychology, religion, memoir, and science. And I tend to reserve more thought-provoking reads with atmospheric relevance for the fall and winter seasons because they feel cozy and introspective, just like those seasons. And then I usually save my upbeat, easier reads for summer as like a light beach read or pool read, because it can be hard to focus when the weather's hot. But ultimately, you can structure this however you want. You can ditch the calendar altogether and go with the seasons of your life for selecting books that feel the most relevant for you at the time of reading. That's kind of what I ended up doing for most of this year. I pivoted from a lot of the books that were originally on my list because I got really absorbed in like mysticism and Zen Buddhism. I wanted to kind of just explore more spiritual themes and spiritual books. So I added like a bunch of those to my list. And I'm really glad I did because sometimes you just have to fuel your interests as they arise. But I also really love picking books at random. So one idea you might have some fun with, and I've never done this, but I heard about it and I was like, ooh, that's kind of like a version of what I do, with my Goodreads, like randomly selecting books at the beginning of the year. But you could throw some slips of paper in a jar with titles to choose from. And the book you draw is the book you'll read. And you can structure a whole list by doing this. And it can just, I like the fact that it kind of adds like a spark of play to your practice. And, you can even make a numbered list of books you've been wanting to read and pull up a random number generator online, because that does exist, I would know, to select your books for the next several months. One other thing you might consider doing as well is curating your own personal canon. And this can look like a list of maybe 5 to 10 books that you have found to be really personally meaningful and applicable to your own life that you can reread maybe every few years. And the purpose of this is twofold. Number one, you get to spend time revisiting the books that shaped you. And number two, you get to see how your response to those books has changed over time, aka, how you have grown over time. This is a very effective way to experience a real relationship with the books that have molded your personality, sharpened your perspective, and challenged your viewpoints. I personally don't have that canon totally developed yet, but off the top of my head, a couple books that I think I'd really want to revisit are, I just lost it, Stoner, by John Williams, I believe is the author. I'm going to be so mad at myself if I butchered that. I don't know what it is with me and authors today. I'm not quite sure why I can't remember author names. And definitely Middlemarch by George Eliot, because that was a book that I read in the last, I want to say like 2 or 3 years that really just struck me. It was perhaps a bit slow moving, but it is something, it is very much a work that you experience and immerse yourself in. And by the time you finish it, you really feel like you are living in the town of Middlemarch. You feel like you have befriended all of these characters, and have just, thoroughly lived within their community. So I would love to go back, and re-experience those themes and those characters, periodically. So definitely, if you have maybe a couple of books in mind, think about throwing them in a little list of, 5 to 10 books, and maybe just revisiting those every couple of years. So speaking of having a relationship with books and a relationship with characters, interacting with the books you read is an extremely important part of building a regular reading practice. Now, this is something that for the majority of my life I had never done unless it was an academic requirement, but I recently in the last few years got into the practice of marginalia, or writing in the margins of my books, and it has actually made a big difference in the ways I absorb what I'm reading. I find if I'm taking the time to just scribble little thoughts in the margins, or maybe underline or highlight memorable passages, I'm spending a bit more time with certain parts of a book that I will then be much more likely to remember. And I think it's really nice to feel like you not only read a book, but retained what you read, or at least retained what was most important. And for me, and I think in general, marginalia is a really great way to achieve that. And I know some people maybe feel a bit funny or guilty about writing all over a nice, crisp, clean book. So if you're able, I would recommend getting your hands on a copy that can be your working copy, and a copy you can designate as maybe a show copy or, a trophy book. You can have a lot of fun with this and select some really striking hardbacks that make great bookshelf ornaments, but, which will ultimately remain untouched. And, obviously these types of books tend to be on the pricier side, but you can actually find some really beautiful editions on eBay or Etsy for less than you would even at a used bookstore. So for me, finding these trophy books has become a bit of a scavenger hunt where I just keep my eyes peeled for striking copies of my favorite books in every bookstore I visit. So I have my working copies and my show copies, and that's an arrangement that works out well for me. And I can, look at my bookcase at any given time and just get a lot of visual satisfaction from that. In addition to marking up your books, you might also consider keeping a reading journal. I have done this, though I will say only really for a few books where I wanted to analyze and record my thoughts in a special way. But you could have an entry for every book, and over time it would become a personal anthology and a really nice way to be able to look back at who you were at specific points in time while you were reading particular books. So now, with all of that established, sort of the process of selecting books and how to read them, I would say another really important part of just cultivating a reading practice is carving out space and time. So for me, one of the most important parts is having a designated space to read. In the past, it always used to be in the tub for an hour or so at night. Not every night, but maybe every other night. But now that my baby's room is right next to the bathroom with the tub, I opt to read in the personal library I've built. And I've made this space something that I'm really proud of and I really love to be in. It has wall-length bookshelves, a Turkish rug that my husband and I bought while we were in Kushadasa, and velvet armchairs. And it's a setting that really inspires me to read and makes the practice feel more intentional for me. But as you can see, from my bathtub anecdote, you can really read anywhere. Maybe marginalia is a bit harder in the tub, but I still think it's a fantastic place to read. Light some candles, make an evening of it. Another tip is to anchor reading to your ordinary habits. So for example, read while you sip your cup of coffee, or while the baby naps, or in bed before you turn the lights out at night. Those tiny slices of time add up, and attaching them to things you already do, I find really makes the habit stick. So now we're going to talk a little bit about making reading a part of your identity. And I'm going to talk about Goodreads for a minute. Some people frown upon Goodreads because many readers tend to use it as a way to brag or get a little competitive about how many books they can read in a year. I use it more as a reading scrapbook. I prefer to do my journaling online on Goodreads in the form of reviews, and I put a lot of thought into what I want to say about a book when I finish it. This helps me to better retain what I've read, and it's nice to be able to go back and see exactly what you thought about each book with just the click of a button. I also love recommending books and having literary conversations with friends and relatives. And you can do this online through Goodreads, or if you're part of a book club, a lot of online ones actually do exist, surprisingly. Or you can start your own in-person club or book exchange. And like basically reading can be equally solitary and social. I think a lot of people tend not to think of reading as a social activity. I'm not really involved in a book club. I never really wanted to be bound to what somebody else was reading or telling me to read, because having autonomy over the books I was selecting was important to me. But I love being able to talk about my reading selections and the latest book and just my thoughts about what I'm reading. And I actually do a lot of that with family, because my family are also voracious readers, so it kind of works out. And then finally, just a little bit of food for thought. How you interact with books will eventually impact your children and even those other family members. When they pick up one of your books with your notes and thoughts scribbled all over it, they'll see not just the book, but a part of you. And the prospect of that is really special for me. This idea that someday my daughter might select a book from my shelf and learn something about me based on the parts of myself I've left in that book. So to wrap things up today, I want to emphasize that cultivating a reading practice isn't about speed or quantity. It's about weaving words into daily rituals so they shape you. A book becomes more than ink and paper when you engage with it fully, when you write back to it, make space for it, and let it accompany you through the seasons of your life. So maybe tonight, light a candle, pour some tea, and pick up a book that's been waiting for you. And remember, it's not just reading, it's practice. It's ritual. It's part of who you are. And until next time, happy reading.